Welcome to this online virtual Salamander series. I'm really glad that you all joined me here because our presentation was canceled the other day due to the virus, obviously. So it's nice that we can all still get together, even though we're not actually together. So yeah, my name is Bronenkant. I am the Youth Leadership Coordinator at Audubon, Vermont. So I used to be an educator and the AmeriCorps member, but I have moved up in my role, and so I'm working on creating our new youth program. But my favorite thing in the world are amphibians, especially salamanders, which some of you I know. So I still wanted to do this presentation to get you all involved. So I'm going to get rid of my video now so that you can just enjoy the presentation. And if you have any questions, please use the chat function of Zoom so that I can answer your questions there. I'll do questions at the end, and I'm going to go through everything right now. So this presentation is going to be all about, oops, it works. It's going to be all about amphibian migration and amphibians. So last year when I did this presentation, I had the intention of going out at Audubon and doing some amphibian monitoring. But since we are not allowed to congregate in groups this year, I'm sort of going to go deep dive into amphibians. And I'm noticing that some of you aren't muted, so make sure that you're muted. And so I'm going to do a deep dive into the amphibians just so that you can ID amphibians on your own. I'm going to go over why they migrate and then a few community science projects that you can be involved in. And this eastern newt was walking really slowly a while back, crossing our parking lot. We couldn't leave one day until it crossed the road, so that's kind of funny. So amazing amphibians are, if you're at home, shout it out. Obviously you're on mute, so that's totally fine. But a few things that make an amphibian are: one, they're cold-blooded; two, they are vertebrate animals, which can be sort of surprising. And they are a class that's comprised of frogs, toads, newts, and salamanders. They also, really important and very, very amphibian-y, is they have an aquatic gill-breathing larval stage, typically followed by a terrestrial lung-breathing adult stage. So you see those tadpoles in the pond, and then they become frogs, and they spend most of their time on land by water. But there's obviously some exceptions. And they lay eggs. So also, is this picture a picture of an amphibian in the corner? You're right, it's not. It is a garter snake, so they are a reptile. So migration, I have this little video. So the goal of migration is for them to mate. So on these warm, rainy nights, they are deciding to get up and go because they are heading to these natal ponds, these ponds where they were born in, to mate. So they start migrating between mid-March and late April. It really is weather dependent. So it depends on the snowpack, it depends on the weather locally. So in your backyard, it's a totally different microclimate than someone else's backyard. And it could go all the way up to early June, but they're moving from the wooded uplands to the those vernal pools, the lowlands. So here's a photo of a vernal pool that I actually monitor in Vermont. Obviously has that classic sugaring lines through it. So this is a hop and spot in the springtime. But vernal pools are hugely fishless water sources that amphibians are going to lay their eggs because they need an eggless space, a fishless space to lay their eggs, otherwise their eggs would be eaten. So they are seasonal pools of water, and they have a pretty distinctive plant and animal habitat. So according to the Vermont Center for Eco Studies, there's 4 parts to a definition of a vernal pool. First part is that it's seasonal. It has a wet, dry cycle, so it fills in the fall and the spring, and it dries out at least partially in the summer. There are no permanent inlets or outlets, so that's huge. So it's hydrologically isolated from permanent water sources. So obviously there will be running water into the pool as it rains, but that's not a permanent source. As I said, there's no resident fish populations, and it provides breeding habitat for vernal pool indicator species like the mole salamander, wood frogs, and fairy shrimp. We'll talk more about that project later. So, surviving the winter in Vermont specifically, it is a challenging place to be an amphibian, right? A cold-blooded creature. So they do a few different, amphibians do a few different things to survive the winter. So first, four-toed salamanders, which we'll talk about later, they winter deep underground, whereas wood frogs, they basically turn themselves into a controlled popsicle. And spotted salamanders they also winter deep underground, especially in rodent tunnels. So we call this migration the big night. The reason why we call it the big night is because amphibians are moving hugely. It can be a concentrated movement of up to 90% of salamanders will go into the pool within the 5 days of the big night. What you need in order to have a big night is that first warm spring rain with temperatures above freezing. The warmer the temperature, the greater number of species and individuals will cross. You want to make sure you dress for the weather and bring a flashlight. We'll talk more about that too. And when you're looking for a good spot to go big night exploring, you want to make sure that you have a vernal pool or some ponds or wetlands where these creatures are going to. They only move after dark too, so that's another key thing. And we will talk more about this as well. I'm sure that some of you are thinking, well, that's already happened, and that's true. So it's hard to decide when to do these presentations because you never know when the big night's going to be. Last year, this made perfect sense. But this year, we had a day that was a temperature close to 50 degrees, and Jim Andrews, our state herpetologist, went out and he found, like near Morgan Road, that around 8:15, they found 74 amphibians in 6 different species. So that is what we're talking about when we're talking about the big night. But since I want you to be prepared for amphibians all year round, I'm also going to go over some egg ID because after the salamanders and frogs have laid their eggs, that is something that you can visit in these ponds that you know about. And you can just go back on your own time and observe them, which is a really great opportunity. So I'll go over some egg ID. This image, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but this image is a great image because you think about the eggs in 3 different parts and the spacing between those 3 different parts. So that inner black dot of the egg that you see is the embryo, and then you have the inner envelope, which goes a little bit around that embryo, and then you have the vitelline membrane, which is that gooier membrane that's surrounding the embryo. And I'm noticing that some of you are chatting me. Okay. The other thing too is I have this cool picture since we're talking about eggs. Oops. These are unfertilized eggs. They often have this like weird, vibrant look to them. So let's jump into amphibian ID. So first, we're going to talk about salamanders. As I go through, I'm going to talk about the Vermont State Wildlife, Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. What they do is they basically rank all of the species in Vermont depending on if they are like at risk. So this is I just want to make this clear that it's Vermont specific. So though something might not be common in Vermont, it could be common elsewhere. So it's not necessarily that it's at risk as a whole, but it's at risk in the state. So an S1 species is at really high risk due to extreme rarity, which is often 5 or fewer populations or occurrences in the state. At S2 is just the next step up, so going from 20 or fewer populations, and S3 is at moderate risk, so 80 or fewer populations. And S4 is locally common or widely scattered, but too uncommon, but they're not rare. And S5 is a common species. So first species, we have the spotted salamander. They are like the megafauna of the amphibian world. So obviously they're still small, but they're pretty big for a creature, and they're pretty exciting. So they grow up to 9 inches long. They are rarely seen other than the breeding season when they're out and about moving, because they are mole salamanders, which means they hang out basically underground in tunnels for the majority of the year. Defining characteristics, of them are that they are a black color with yellow spots down their sides. When they mate, they all gather together and the males court the females. If you go to a vernal pool at night and there are spotted salamanders and you keep your red light on, you'll see them all hanging out, congressing together. They are very, very active. The males typically respond really quickly to the rain and are there first before the females, just hanging out waiting. So here's some of that egg ID that I talked about. So in the top corner, those are spermatophores. So a lot of the way that salamanders are breeding are the males, they put their spermatophores on the bottom of the pools, and then the females are picking them up through their cloaca to fertilize their eggs. There are, the next picture over are spotted salamander babies in the midst of developing at my vernal pool. And then next photo over, the bigger one, is spotted salamander eggs that we found in our vernal pool. In the right corner, that photo is a little bit blurry, but that really cloudy mass of eggs, that is a spotted salamander mass. Spotted salamander eggs typically can be kind of cloudy, so that's a good indicator. A huge indicator about why a spotted salamander egg mass is that they typically have about 30 eggs in each mass. It's kind of like the size of a softball, and their egg masses are stiff. It feels, I'm trying to think of what it feels like. It feels like, I don't even know, like almost like a kickball. It's super, it has some squish to it, but it is definitely thicker. And they will lay approximately 100 to 300 eggs in their year. And yeah, and then there's their range maps on there, so you can check out. In Vermont, they're pretty common. This is a photo of a spotted salamander. My finger and the muddy picture that I found that spotted salamander on the first program I led as an AmeriCorps, and typically, like I said, you don't see them except for when they're moving about, so that was super special, proving the specialness of Audubon, Vermont. And then I put it in a yogurt container with a red-backed salamander, which are typically much smaller, to prove how small it is. And that will make sense later as I introduce you to the red-backed salamander. So this is the blue spotted salamander. So they are another mole salamander. So they are coming from underground, and they're one of the first to move, just like the yellow spotted salamanders. They say that their blue spots resemble that old style enamelware, which I can picture perfectly, but it's more like a flecking than a particular spot, and they can grow up to 5 inches, so not as big as a spotted salamander, but still pretty big. And a huge defining characteristic, besides the fact that they are blue spotted, is that they are dark black compared to the Jefferson or the spotted salamander. So, and they are an S3 species, and they're found at lower elevations near floodplains and semi-permanent pools of water and marshes. So their eggs are laid, in sheets at the bottom. So they're a little bit harder to find because they're not right at the surface, which often spotted salamander egg masses are, and same with Jefferson. They have 1 to 30, which is kind of funny because they could have a single egg or a 30 mass, but you typically find about 30. And the males court the females just like the spotted salamanders. Yeah, so next on our list, we have the Jefferson salamander. So this is another mole salamander and is similar to the blue and the spotted, but this one has no spots. So they are just basically this gray color as opposed to this darker color like the other two. And a defining characteristic is that they have 13 costal grooves, and what those are, if you've ever picked up a salamander, you might notice it almost looks like they have ribs on the side of them. They have those little indents. Those are their costal grooves. So they have about 13 of them, which helps you to find them. They're 5 to 7 inches long, so they are a little bit smaller than the blue and the yellow, but they hybridize with blue spotted salamanders as well. When they hybridize, they lay less eggs, and oftentimes they create sterile offspring. But this is their eggs. I think it's really easy to identify Jefferson salamander eggs just because of their embryo is so much bigger than their vitelline membrane. So they look like they have like really big eyeballs compared to littler eyeballs. And they're often smaller egg masses, even though they can be 12 to 75. And they're usually pretty strategically placed on a stick. So these are both photos from my vernal pool. And yeah. Then this one should be familiar, especially to people who are in Vermont, the Eastern newt. So the Eastern newt is really cool. They have 4 stages of their life. So they start off as an egg, and then they go to the larval stage. So they have their little external gills and live in the water for a little bit. And then they grow up a little bit more, and they turn into teenagers or juveniles, and they go out into the woods, and they hang out into the woods for up to 8 years on land, not always 8, but up to 8. And so when they're on land, they're that bright red stage, and it's called the red F stage. So that is the same species as the Eastern newt, but that's their juvenile stage. So often when you're out looking for salamanders and frogs migrating, you'll see them moving around. And if they're that bright orange stage, they're actually not going to the pools to mate, because they're still a juvenile. They're not in their breeding phase. But they are just out on a rainy night going for a stroll. And then as they grow up, the last stage of their life, the adult stage, when they're ready to mate, their tails turn flat, their tops of them turn dark, they keep their orange belly, but it gets a little bit more muted, and they're fully aquatic. And so they're living exclusively in the water, and their tail almost looks like a fish tail. It's a really good swimming tail, and I have some good photos on the next slide. But they can live between 12 and 15 years. And spotted salamanders can live up to 20 years, which is kind of wild. So they lay between 100 and 400 jelly-covered eggs. So they lay a lot more eggs than the other mole salamanders. They typically attach them to vegetation. They often are covered with all sorts of green goo hanging around. And the females do a good job of attaching them singularly to vegetation, and then having them be a clump. And they are really abundant in Vermont. And they do something called amplexus, which means that the males grab the females to court them. And yeah, so there's a photo of that in the top right corner. And you can see that fish tail. And then you can see the underbelly of the newt in that other photo. And this one is such a cool salamander. So this is the 4-toed salamander. They are identified by their rusty back. So they have this like nice, it's not orange, it's more rust color. It's really beautiful, and hugely defined by their white belly and their black spots on their belly. That is definitely a key characteristic for defining them. They live in forests, and they live like especially forested wetlands. They eat small arthropods, which is really great. They are an S2, so they have a conservation need in them. So if you see one of these while you are going out and looking for amphibians while they're migrating, take a photo and make sure that it is right. We'll go into that later, but make sure that you take a photo of these. They live less than 1,000 feet in elevation, and they're much smaller, just like the Eastern newt. So they're 2 to 5 inches. So only the females migrate to the pools where they lay their eggs, and they mate they've mated previously, and they lay their eggs over sphagnum moss adjacent to pools. So I have a photo of this in this slide. So they deposit 20 to 50 eggs, and they actually lay their eggs right in the moss, and then they lay their eggs, the moss that they choose is right over wetland, so that when the eggs hatch, the young drop into the water, which is pretty magical and very cool. And the female stays with the eggs and guards them until they hatch, which is really cool. So they're really cool. And you can see on their species map in Vermont that they are not as common, and they are sticking pretty much to the Champlain Valley. And yeah, so this one I feel like a lot of you maybe have seen. So this is the Eastern redback salamander, another smaller salamander and another cool salamander. They are considered to maybe the most abundant vertebrate, which is a backboned animal in the Northeast. They're a terrestrial salamander, so they get their wetness and their safe space in the leaves of the forest floor, and they spend their entire life in the forest. So I have better photos here. So they are laying their eggs on the forest floor in the leaf litter. Have you ever picked up leaves in the leaf litter? And the top layer is nice and dry, but beneath it is nice and wet. So they're hiding out in those wet oases. And they lay their eggs in grape-like clusters. So they only lay 3 to 17 eggs. And then the female stays with the eggs, just like the four-toed salamander, until they hatch as well. And she keeps them safe. This breed of salamander species of salamander has something called a lead phase. So that picture in the middle, that gray salamander, is the same species, but they have this lead phase. And a huge defining characteristic for the redback salamanders is they have a red back, but in the gray one, they have a gray back. But those black lines don't start until after their head, which will help you for defining them against this one. So the two-lined salamander looks really similar to the lead phase because they have that black line that starts right behind their eye, but they look really similar to the lead phase. They're 3 to 5 inches long, and they have basically a yellow or brown or gray stripe down the middle of their back that goes all the way down to the end of their body. And these are staying near water. So if you've come to Audubon, I bet a lot of you have, and you've played in the brooks of Audubon, I bet that you found one of these. And they're really cool. So they lay their eggs on the bottoms of rocks in those moving water sources that they're hanging out in. And they stick around with their eggs as well. I have a cool video to show later of one that I found. So that bigger picture is the mom with her eggs. In the right corner are the eggs attached to the rock, but those eggs have developed a little bit more. You can see they've gone from those spots to more like squiggles. And in the top corner is the juvenile phase. And oftentimes I feel like people think that this is a mud puppy, but they are not. So a big defining characteristics between their juvenile stage is that they don't have a perfect line down their backs. And that will become clear when I show you the mud puppy. Another salamander friend that hangs near the water is the northern dusky salamander. So they are a smaller salamander. They have more of a stout looking face, and they are grayish brown. They don't have any lines on them, and they are sticking near the water. A huge defining characteristic for them is that their back legs are larger and stronger than their front legs. So they're sort of like leaned forward. And so they lay their eggs under moss or over steeps, and the female remain with them as well. Another salamander, which we caught this summer at summer camp at Audubon, and it was so cool, is the spring salamander. So their Latin name means it means tadpole lover because they spend so much time as a gilled larva. They're super long. They almost look like a fish. Their legs are so little. And they are living in the brooks and places like that. They can grow up to 8 inches, and they're that like pink salmon-y color. And they love cold mountain streams. So the brook at Audubon is a great place. And they lay 16 to 160, which is wild, eggs on the underside of rocks. And their larval stage, that tadpole loving stage, so they hang out in that stage. They have really long feather-like pink gills, which are cool. And then the mud puppy. So they are a completely aquatic salamander. So we have a terrestrial salamander and we have a completely aquatic salamander, which means that they're spending all of their time in water. They're Vermont's largest salamander. They have, like you can see in that photo with that person's hands, they are huge, and they have those external gills. They usually live at depth, so they live up to 60 feet in Lake Champlain, and they live in the Connecticut River as well. They attach their eggs one at a time to the underside of rocks and logs, similar to the other ones. And you can see in that larval stage that they have that really distinct stripe that goes all the way down their back of that larval stage. And you can see, obviously, on this map, they're sticking to the Champlain Valley and then the river on the other side. So finally, we're on to frogs. Woohoo! I'm trying to go fast so we can get to the other stuff. So the spring peeper, the classic spring sound. A defining characteristic of the peeper is that they have that X on their back. So they're called crucifer because they have that X on their back. They perform a peep or a trill, and I'm going to play the sounds for you so that you can understand them, because unlike salamanders do make noise. I've never heard it myself. but they more just like blow bubbles, if anything. So frogs really, really make calls. They're kind of like birds. And to attract a mate, what they're doing is they're calling for a mate. So this is what the peeper sounds like. Okay, can't get it to stop, but we'll go to the next slide. So they are super duper small. So I like to say they're the size of your first joint of your finger. So there's a photo of it on someone's hand. So they're 0.7 to 1.3 inches long. I really like this video because when you hear, I'll play in a second, when you hear peepers, it sounds like it's obviously the chorus of all of them competing over each other, but this video really shows you how an individual makes their call. But all together, they make that peeper sound, which is really great. But they're just going peep, peep. So they lay their eggs singularly or in clusters on the bottom of a pool, on rocks and things like that. And they are really abundant, which I'm sure you know. In my frog slides, you'll see in the corner, I have a little black dot. That's the size of their egg and what their egg looks like. So you can compare the eggs as we go along. This is the wood frog. So wood frogs are one of the first to move. They freeze themselves in the winter, like I said in the beginning. So they actually have ice penetrate through their abdominal cavity, and it encases all of their organs. But they keep from freezing completely because they have this substance in them that's like acts as an antifreeze. But as their blood stops flowing, as much as 65% of the total frog's body water is converted to ice. So they basically freeze themselves. And then those first warm days that aren't even that warm, they can be pretty cold, they will be moving. They're right there with the mole salamanders, sometimes even before. And they are, they have that characteristic of that black mask, and they're spending their time, they're called the wood frog. They spend most of their time in the woods, and they're hiding in the leaf litter, and they really look like leaves. So this is what they sound like. We like to say they make like a raucous quacking sound. If you go to Peeper Pond, you will soon hear them doing their call, because they are explosive breeders. So what they do is they all go, they mate, and then they leave. So you will go to Peeper Pond one day and be amazed by how many wood frogs there are, and then go a couple days later and they could be totally gone. Their eggs are really easy to identify, because if you were to pick up the mass, you can see how bumpy that egg mass is. You can feel each individual egg. They are much easier to feel than the salamander eggs. They don't have that like hard jelly casing. You can almost see the bumps, especially in that photo down below. And they really clump up. They create almost like rafts. And so the next one is the gray tree frog. So this is a tree frog, and they spend most of their time on trees, which is pretty cool. They trill once it starts to reach 60 degrees. Another defining characteristics besides their gray bodies is in between their hips. They have yellow creases, which are pretty cool. And they are pretty small. So they're 2 to 2.5 inches long. And I will play their call, which is my favorite. That just sounds like summer to me. And so they will be breeding in the ponds basically after the mole salamanders and the wood frogs. So they can lay anytime between April and August, and their egg masses are filmy, and they're much smaller, just almost like a peeper frog. Their juvenile stage, they turn this bright green color. At Audubon, you can find them hiding in the milkweed after they have emerged from the pond, and they have those really sticky toes, which are really cool. So how many do you see? Also, what is this called when animals are really good at hiding in their habitat? If you said camouflage, you're right. And I see 1, 2, 3, 4. They're really good at hiding. So they're really hard to find. You have to seek them out when they're calling. I have a hard time finding them. One time I found one because I almost stepped on it, so not so good. The American bullfrog, another classic one. So they're the largest frog in the Northeast. A defining characteristic is they don't have a dorsolateral ridge. So I'll show you on a different frog, but lots of frogs have these bumped up lines that go from behind their eye all the way down their backs. Their bump goes right, that line just goes right around that big circle, which is the frog's ear, which is called their tympanum. Fun fact, if frogs' tympanums are as big or bigger than their eye, it's a male frog. If they're smaller, it's a female frog. So the bullfrog just wraps right around their eye, and they can get as big as 7 inches long, which is pretty crazy. And they're mostly green, and we like to say they have that deep, low juggaroom, juggaroom. And so this is what it sounds like. It's much better than me doing it. And you find them in the ponds, which I'm sure you know. And so their eggs are kind of, they're pretty average looking, but you can figure out their eggs around the time of year that you're finding eggs in the pond, and they're usually at the surface. In Vermont, they remain a tadpole through 1 or 2 winters. So I remember as a kid, my dad thinking that I was crazy for seeing tadpoles under ice, and I was right. So there are certain frogs that overwinter. The reason why they're doing that is they have the advantage in the next year to be the biggest tadpole in the pool. So they are going to eat they are predators of those young juvenile salamanders and everything like that if they're in the pool. So they have an advantage that way. And then green frogs. So you'll see on the green frog, unlike the bullfrog, that dorsolateral ridge, that bumped up layer of skin that goes down their back, it goes all the way down their back instead of not behind their ear. So that is what I'm talking about. So green frogs and bullfrogs look really similar. A big way to tell them apart is that the bullfrog doesn't have the dorsolateral ridge. Green frogs often have stripes on their legs, but they're usually broken. And this is what they sound like. I like to say it sounds like a banjo. And this is what their eggs look like. So they have, you can distinguish between their layers of their egg a little bit better. And they also overwinter as a tadpole too, and are really common. The American toad. So often you'll see them when you're going out looking for salamanders. They are a toad, not a frog, so they have bumpier skin. The American toad has 1 bump per black line around. There's a different toad that I'll show you that's different. And they do a really long trill that's about 12 seconds. And if you were all in a room with me, I would make you trill for about 12 seconds. But since we're not together, I challenge you to try it on your own. But I will play their call. I love that sound. Their eggs are really cool. So they lay their eggs in long strands. As the female's going along laying their eggs, the male will often be on top fertilizing those eggs. And they are so small when they call them toadlets. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of walking through the woods and as you're about to put your foot down, the ground sort of moves beneath you because all the little toadlets are in one place together, and they are moving out of the way, but that is a pretty awesome experience, and I definitely have had that in Vermont. This is a picture I took in Pennsylvania. It's kind of tricky because it's not underwater, but you can see there the female frog is much bigger than the male. The male's actually on top. I can really see his glands that are right behind his eye. And she's going along laying her eggs. The strands are caught on something and they're pulling as she's going. And you can see there's 2 strands coming out behind her, which is really cool to see. The northern leopard frog, they are cool. So they are this awesome green that I love. And something to define them is that they have a light halo that surrounds the spots on them. Their bright color that I love that I was talking about can change. It can be more brown. And they have really thick, strong, defined dorsolateral ridges. They need permanent water for overwintering, but they spend all their time living in floodplains. So they're hanging out, or marshes, so they're hanging out in wet fields. And so they are the greatest snake food of all time. I am not sure if any of you have ever been to the Buckner Nature Preserve that the Nature Conservancy owns in southern Vermont. It's basically the thumb of Vermont, that piece that juts out into Lake Champlain. it is a really ecologically diverse place. It's so cool. And they have this awesome field and all these rare snakes because there are so many leopard frogs to feed those snakes, which is really cool. They lay their eggs in softball-sized masses. And yeah, so you can see they're really hanging around the Champlain Valley. And you see that thumb of Vermont, again, not sure if you can see my mouse, but that thumb that juts into the lake, that's where they're hanging out. People often get them confused with the pickerel frog. The pickerel frogs, they have more rectangular lined spots, and they have a dark circle around their spot. A huge, oh, I forgot to play leopard frog call. Reverse. So it's that weird, like, bubbly sound. It sounds like you dropped a ping pong table on a really hard surface to me. And so the pickerel frog has these bright yellow, they say it's a yellow waistcoat. So they have these bright yellow legs. So if you ever are not sure if you have a pickerel frog or a leopard frog, if you can catch it, see if it has a yellow waistcoat, because then you'll know it's a pickerel frog. But another thing is that their spots are outlined in dark, not that light halo. This is their sound. People say it sounds like a zipper unzipping, sort of, to me, but I guess that's the closest thing we can relate it to. And they hang out near ponds. They often are found near beaver ponds, and I often find them at beaver pond. And then their eggs are pretty cool. They're almost like golden, and they are dense masses, just like that. And then we have our mink frog. So the mink frog is often hard to define. It's easier because they spend most of their time in the Northeast Kingdom, but they have those, they have green, their spots are really just sort of like dispersed and random. So they don't have any lines across their legs, unlike the green frog or the other frogs. Lots of frogs have lines on their legs, so they more have spots. So you can see on that map that they're really in the Northeast Kingdom. And I didn't find a picture of their eggs, so I don't have them here. And then the rare ones. So in Vermont, the rare frogs are the boreal chorus frog, which essentially looks like a peeper, but the big difference is that they don't have that big X on their back. And the other one is the Fowler's toad, which essentially looks like an American toad, except for the fact that it has multiple warts in each black dark spot, unlike the American toad has just one wart in their black spots. Okay, so I just put this graph in here to show that as time goes on, you see the calls increase. So you can see that the frogs are mating at different times. So the spring peeper sort of just kind of sings all summer long, but the wood frog and the peeper and the American toad are one of the first to start doing their mating calls and going to the ponds and mating. So as the summer goes along, you can be checking out your pools for different amphibians, and I highly encourage you to do that. But that's why we're going to focus on a few creatures that are in the beginning of the big night. So let's get back to why I gathered you here. I want you to be a part of the migration. So can you see that wood frog in this photo hiding in the leaf litter? It's freezing. You can almost see the ice on the ground. So this is like the time of year where they're migrating. So I'm looping back to what I was talking about in the beginning. So these amphibians are not trying to cross the road, but they have to cross the road because we put the road between their natal pond and where they go in the winter. So this is a pretty amazing feat. So this is some statistics that North Branch pulled together. Spotted salamanders may travel more than a quarter mile through dense woods, across open fields, clear cuts, and over roads to reach their breeding pool. That's a really long way to go with legs that are so small. And 90% of the spotted salamanders return to their vernal pool just over 5 days. So they're all doing this movement at once. And so the reason why we want you to be out there doing road crossings is because, which this next picture, if you don't want to see something dead, don't look, is because of road crossing mortality. So unfortunately, people drive by, it's hard to see these amphibians as you're crossing over. So road crossing mortality, as low as 10% can lead to the extirpation of an amphibian population. So even though you just kill a few, it can really have a huge impact on amphibians. So there are a few different projects that I'm going to talk about before that we'll talk about the road crossing so you can be involved. But this is a project that I mentioned before, the Vermont Vernal Pool Monitoring Project. So the Vermont Center for Eco-Cities does this project every year. They essentially want you to adopt a vernal pool and sort of collect a bunch of data about that vernal pool. If you have a vernal pool in your backyard and you're not going to be going anywhere anytime soon, it is a great project to be a part of. One, it's sort of some deeper science compared to other community science projects. It's a really cool project. They have great information on their website. And so I just encourage you to monitor those vernal pools. As climate change is happening, it's really essential to monitor what's happening to these pools, because since they do not have a source of water, we are really curious what will happen with them and the species that need them in order to survive. The other project that Audubon has joined up with is the North Branch Nature Center's Amphibian Road Crossing program, which they also call ARC. So the goal is to get people out and learning about amphibians. So we've already done that. I've already had you here today learning about amphibians, but now we're going to talk a little bit more about their migration. You can directly decrease their impact, and also we can, with the data of all the amphibians that are crossing, we can maybe make some changes about the way traffic goes on those big nights. So last year when I did this presentation, I wanted people to come and listen to me talk and learn all of the information they need to learn to then go out and and I wanted them to come with me and monitor a site. So I created a site at Audubon. So Audubon is right where that red balloon is. And then if you follow Sherman Hollow up, you see it bends in the road. And then if you follow it down, it comes to the main road. That was our site. It's still our site, and I've been out and monitored it once so far. But they are going from the woods of Audubon, and then they are going down to Peeper Pond, which that bright pond that you can see is Beaver Pond, but Peeper Pond is that weird little like dirty smudge off to the right of it. So our site is called ARC 170. And then this is a cool map that the Huntington Conservation Commission put out. So it basically is like the darker the color, the more activity there are. Obviously that's where people are going, but these are all great spaces in the Huntington area to go look for amphibians. But so who will we likely see? I just told you about all the amphibians in Vermont. And so when you're going out on these first big nights, you will likely see, who's that? I'm gonna let you try to guess all of the creatures. If you said Peeper, you're right. Who's that? The eastern newt, AKA in the red F phase. What about this? The spotted salamander. And this, the red-backed salamander, wood frog, American toad. This one's kind of a terrible photo, but the four-toed salamander, the Jefferson salamander, the blue spotted salamander. And so how it works, so usually I would at the end gather your emails and I would send you an email on the nights that I was going out to invite you to come with me. But I am not going to be doing that this year, obviously, because we cannot gather because of this virus. So instead, I'm going to encourage you to choose your own site. So the North Branch Nature Center has an amazing resource. They have all of their videos recorded, so you can basically do the trainings online about how to monitor a road crossing near you. So essentially what you have to do is choose a site near you on the North Branch Nature Center map, which I can show you in the next slide. You visit your sites on rainy nights during early spring. You walk your transect, so you have to go from point to point. Since it is data that you're collecting, we really want it to be scientific. So we want to make sure that you are following that protocol, and the protocol is all online. And then if you see amphibians that need to be escorted off the road, escort them. We want to minimize touching the amphibians because we could be transmitting disease across species, as well as they breathe through their skin. So if you have anything on your hands, we don't want to hurt them. But if they are in the way of the road, definitely move them off the road. And then what you want to do, photograph the rare ones just to prove that you found one, and we can all identify it together. And then you repeat it with a new data sheet on the next walk back. So this is what that map sort of looks like when you go to the North Branch website. You can click the map, you can find where you live, and you can find places near you. The red spots are suspected crossing sites but that haven't been checked out. So if you're near one of those, I really encourage you to check one of those out. The yellow have at least 1 to 5 surveys completed, and the green basically are good to go and they have lots of data, except for the fact that they're probably really good places to go. If you're just looking to go and see who's out there and not really collect data, it'd be great for you to go out and check those spots out. Once you have recorded your data, and you're recording things like the temperature and all sorts of stuff, which when you go through their protocol, they can tell you all about that. You can enter it basically through your phone if you have service in the field. You can enter it at home on your computer, and you can just fill out the piece of paper and upload it later if you so choose, but you can definitely submit it online. Another thing that you can do, / a great resource, is the Reptile and Amphibian Atlas. They are, so Jim Andrews, basically you can report a sighting. So if you do that, it will go into the Reptile and Amphibian Atlas. Also, if you're looking for species information, it's a great website. It's really awesome. So this is a great resource for species identification. But something that you can do that is potentially even a better option is using iNaturalist. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with iNaturalist. It's an app that you can get on your phone. You also can use the website as well. The whole point is to sort of get people together to figure out what you have. And it's become a pretty epic source of data. If you're in the birding community, eBird is a really great database that people record what they see or hear for birds, and scientists all over use that data. It is really useful. Scientists vet it, and it's really awesome. So iNaturalist is sort of similar to that, although you can basically report anything, which is kind of nice. So if you were walking down the road and you saw something else, which you typically would, you could report that. You have to upload a photo and you can identify it yourself, or if you want someone else to identify it, they can help you figure out who it is. But Jim Andrews will upload all of that data to the HERP Atlas anyway. So it's sort of is redundant if you're doing both, but you can definitely, so it's kind of a nice thing to just use iNaturalist because essentially your data will be input into the HERP Atlas. So when you're going out, I want to make sure that you are prepared and safe. So things that you'll need, the huge safety piece is making sure that you are safe. It's like any safety course that you've ever taken. If you've taken one, protect yourself first, make sure the scene is safe. So by making your scene safe, you're making yourself seen. It's the middle of the night, it's dark. Even if you think cars can see you, they can't. You have to wear reflective things, and you have to wear a headlamp as well as other flashlights. When I go out, I wear reflective pieces on both of around my ankles, and I wear a bright vest. I also have a flashlight and a backup flashlight, and I wear a headlamp just in case. I'm still pulling off and making sure that cars can pass by if I am out there, but making sure that you are safe is really, really key. It's going to be raining if you're doing it right. So wearing a raincoat and rain pants and rain boots are key. Bringing a camera or a smartphone to take a photo, as well as your data sheet if you are collecting data. The other thing that I wanted to say about iNaturalist and reporting to the HERP Atlas is if you want to just go out and just sort of see what you see, no pressure, not have to walk a certain distance, make sure you can just take a photo and see what you see and report data that way, as opposed to being a part of the bigger data collection. But the bigger data collection is pretty cool as well. So those are 2 ways you can be involved. You want to make sure you bring extra batteries just in case your flashlight dies. And then a spatula for dead amphibians, because when you are doing your transect, you basically walk out the road and then you walk back your transect. And so if you are, if you don't want to double count because you're counting dead and alive, because the whole point is to see how amphibians are impacted with the traffic. So you want to make sure you're moving them over. If you have gloves, you can just move them over with your gloves on. And yeah, and so the other thing, that safety piece, is I want to make sure that the amphibians are safe. So like I said, they breathe through their skin. So when you go out, no perfume or bug spray or lotion. If you wear gloves, it can protect the amphibians, and only handling them when it's necessary, because like I said, if one amphibian is sick, and you're touching multiple, you could potentially impact and pass on that sickness between them. If you bring a bucket, if there's so many to count that you need to bucket them up so that they're not hopping all in front of you, you could bring a bucket. And then the protocol manual if you're doing the North Branch protocol, just because it helps to remember exactly what you need to do. And another key point is, and this is like when I had my site at Audubon, I would have people park at the Sugar House parking lot, and then we would walk up. You don't want to drive through your transect. That's just putting the amphibians at risk. The point is to keep cars off the road and to keep the amphibians safe. So make sure you're parking at the beginning of your transect and not driving through it. That is not a safe thing for the amphibians. And then this year, the COVID-19 safety. So when you're going out this year, you should only be going out with by yourself or with people that you are in your household with. If you are monitoring with someone outside of your household, you should follow the CDC guidelines and make sure you're keeping 6 feet apart. Be cautious when you're sharing equipment. So if you can bring all of your own things, bring all of your own things. Don't be passing things around. No one should carpool with anyone outside of their house, as well as it would be great if you didn't carpool at all. So I know in the state of Vermont, we're trying to not go far at all. So if you have a walking distance place to go, I would recommend going out and looking for amphibians, but I am not recommending that people go out in their cars and drive to different places. I recommend staying close to home, just like everybody else. You should just be walking in your neighborhood and things like that. And if you visit a site where other groups are present, give them plenty of space or go elsewhere. And like I said, avoid sites far from home and make sure you're washing your hands and only handling the animals when you need to. So the goal is to make sure that they are successful in their breeding. This is a video that I took. I found a northern two-lined mom protecting her eggs. And they were all moving around, almost ready to hatch, which was pretty cool. So once you have done all that and you've studied and everything like that, you can congratulate yourself because you've helped amphibians at your site and across Vermont. So like I said, the goal is to get them out there to save the amphibians, to get you knowing about amphibians in general. And these are 3 of my favorite photos that I took at Audubon of children having just amazing moments with amphibians. So I believe that I have all of your emails because of you signing up through here. If you have any questions, you can email me. I can write my email in the chat. And then, so in the future, next year, I can keep you on an email list and you can stay tuned for pop-up crossing amphibian nights with me. Obviously, I'm not going to be gathering with people this year. But I can definitely, if you sign up, I will keep you up to date about what's going on with the amphibians. And you all can send me what you see because that is what is it all about. So I can update people. So if you have any questions, let me know. This also, side note, that's me, but this is when I went salamandering, I found an albino salamander with a red eye and everything, so that's pretty great. So let me know if you have questions. I'm not sure the best way to do this. I'll read through the chat. And I guess if you feel comfortable with Zoom, you could also, I can stop sharing my screen and you can also hop on with your voice or with your video and you can show me ask me what you want to ask. But this are some resources as well that I'll leave up for a minute. So I'll bring my video back. I am still becoming a Zoom master. And then I'll pull up. So I can see everybody now because I stopped sharing my screen. So if anybody has any questions, you can unmute yourself if you want. But I'll go through the chat box. Also, I appreciate you all coming. I hope this was informational. Oh, Zach posted a cool resource about all the different colors that redback salamanders come in. So if you're looking for crossing sites near where you are, how about I just show you, I'm going to share my screen again and I can show you what you should do for using the North Branch website. I'm just gonna get it pulled up. One second. So can everybody see my screen again? Maybe not. Did that work? Okay, so when you go to the website, you can go to citizen science, and then that drop down comes down to amphibian conservation. Click on that, and then over on the side are quick links to all the things you need. The crossing map is right here. And so the crossing map is really interactive and awesome. So you can just zoom into where you're at. Like I am over in Burlington. And you can see if there's any sites near you. And like I said, there's those red, yellow, and green spots. So you can pick where you are and then find spots near you. That's what I recommend doing for that. I'm going to keep scrolling through the chat. People are sharing some awesome resources, which is really great. Yeah, and someone talked about a beaver pond not qualifying for a vernal pool. Totally not. So at Audubon, we have the Peeper Pond, and we also have Beaver Pond. And Beaver Pond has an inlet and outlet, and it's definitely not a vernal pool. There are definitely fish in there, though the eastern newts do spend a lot of time in there. But you definitely see those other frogs that I was talking about too. So it looks like I'm not seeing any other questions that I didn't answer. And this will be recorded, and I am going to upload it so you can access it later. Yes. Let's see, 2 more messages. So great. If nobody has any other, oh, yep. Yeah, this is a great resource too. Maybe we can make like a Facebook page so that people can link up with other people. That's a good question. So someone's talking about if you touch the eggs too long, will it affect them from hatching? So I try not to touch the eggs too much at all. Sometimes I have to in order to identify them, because really you can tell by the different textures. So I, like anything, it's just a vulnerable state. I consider it to be like an amphibian. So I keep my hands really, really wet, really clean, and I only pick them up for a little bit just to feel it and put them right back, because I don't want to hurt them any more than I need to. So yeah, that's a good question. Anything else? I really appreciate you all being on here. This is great. I'm so glad, because this is my favorite thing ever. So I will email you all so you have my email. Oh, I'm going to put my email in the chat actually really quickly. And then you can reach out to me if you have any other questions, and I will let you know when things look good, and keep you up to date on some cool spots. If anybody sends me anything that they find that's cool, I'll share it with everybody. And I'm considering making an amphibian group, because I feel like that would be really cool. So great. And I'll post this video. It will be Audubon. Actually, I'm going to post this link. Audubon has an at-home website right now. So we've created a bunch of different activities that you can do at home. And so we are encouraging you to take this time to use that resource. I'll post that link, but I am going to post all of my amphibian stuff in there. And it is a great resource, and it's free to you all. Oops, to everybody. So definitely check that out. And so I'll post it there, and I'll post other things. I'm going to go out and I'm going to take videos of myself looking for creatures so that everybody can join along from their home, because I know in Burlington there aren't really a lot of good places to go. So I want to make sure that people can join along. I went out and took a video, but I only saw like 2 creatures, and it was really embarrassing, so I'm not going to post that. But I will post other ones in the future. So keep an eye out for that if you don't have any places near you. But yeah, okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And I think that my email didn't go to everybody, but I'll send it